Welcome to Mintel Little Conversation, real conversations with actionable insights into what consumers want and why. I'm Lynn Dornblaser, Client Advisor, Mintel Solutions at Mintel, and today we are talking about consumer sentiment and the election, very specifically the U.S. election. I'm joined by Lisa Dubina, who is Associate Director of Culture and Identity, and also BJ Pichman, who is one of our principal consultants. So just to be clear to everyone who's listening in, this is not about political parties. It's not about political candidates. It's very specifically about American values, as I said, what consumers are thinking and feeling, and also about what brands are doing or not doing or should be doing. So just to level set exactly what we're talking about. So I think, Lisa, there's a lot here for you to tell us about in terms of what's going on with what consumers are thinking and feeling these days. Tell us a little bit about the research that Mintel has done and what you're finding.
Sure. So we fielded quite a few surveys this year to really trend and track consumer sentiment throughout this election season. So our first data is from May of this year. Then we have a second one from August, and actually one that just left fields this week. And we're really seeing mixed emotions. Consumers are understandably very stressed and anxious about the upcoming election and what the outcome is going to be. And so that sense of the unknown is definitely impacting consumers at this time.
Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people talk about election fatigue. Is that something that you feel like is coming through in all this research?
Yes, definitely. We have a couple attitudinal statements about keeping up with election news and coverage, and we're definitely seeing that consumers are, I think the statement is, quote, tired of election news and coverage. So it's definitely one of those topics that's been drawn out probably for the past 2 years, if not more, and something that's difficult to escape. We're seeing consumers are saying it's something that's taking up not only when they're watching the news or online, but also in their social circles. So it's a bit of a unavoidable topic that's really looming over them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. BJ, does it feel like when it comes to what brands are doing, are they amplifying that fatigue that consumers have, or are they helping consumers feel less of that election cycle fatigue?
I would say that this election cycle, it feels like brands are playing it a little more cautious. They are staying a little more quiet, I would say, when it comes to, getting get out to vote campaigns. This is something that it seems like, we saw a lot of in 2020. We're not seeing as many of them as in 2024. Certainly there's some brands who are, kind of forging ahead with it. But it just seems like if you're aligning yourself with this message of get out to vote, and some consumers may want to dig a level deeper and maybe see where you're coming from. They want to know what side you're on. If you're telling me to vote, how should I feel about this request to vote? So I think in that instance, some brands are kind of pulling back and not diving headfirst into it.
Mm-hmm. I've seen a couple brands that have a very strong position. They're very happy to talk about that very strong, specific position that they have. And you do wonder to what degree that has a positive and also a very negative influence on how consumers perceive the brand, how they engage with the brand, if they engage with the brand. So the whole idea of playing it a little bit, being a little more cautious and higher level and focusing on voting as opposed to vote this way or vote that way seems to make a lot more sense for brands themselves.
Right. Absolutely.
And we definitely see that in our consumer data as well. Brands getting involved in political issues is still highly polarizing. I believe it was back in 2020. I think it was around a third of consumers said that brands should be taking a stance on political and social issues. And this year we saw an increase to 50-50 that brands should be taking a stance or brands should not be taking a stance, which is a pretty notable increase, yet that is still definitely, right down the middle, very polarized. So brands, as BJ said, that are smaller, have a much more niche audience, I think are better positioned to take any steps into the deep end of political issues.
Mm-hmm. I would assume the degree to which consumers might want to or not want to engage with any of those brands really would have a lot to do with how they feel in general. And I know, Lisa, you've done some great work in segmenting consumers into some really specific segments when it comes to the election. Can you talk about that a little bit, about those consumer segments?
Sure. So most of the time in our political research and surveys, we ask consumers about political affiliation, but we also ask them to describe political ideology, if you will. And so we really use both of those answers to assign our respondents their political segment. And so we have conservative Republicans, so respondents that affiliate with the Republican Party and also describe their beliefs as very or somewhat conservative. On the other hand, then we have liberal Democrats affiliate with the Democratic Party and describe their beliefs as very or somewhat liberal. Then kind of moving towards the middle, we have light Republicans and light Democrats. They both affiliate with the corresponding party, but describe their beliefs a little different from what their party is known for. So light Democrats really describe themselves as either in the middle or even leaning conservative, and the opposite for light Republicans. And then we have our independent segment, which they don't affiliate with any party in particular or a third party, and their political beliefs can really span the spectrum of conservative to liberal. And so we really see that our outer pillar groups, so conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats, are always the most politically engaged, really keeping up with that news, and have the strongest political opinions. And as we kind of move towards the center with light Democrats and light Republicans, we start to see definitely a little less political engagement in terms of having very strong opinions, and definitely more of a desire for bipartisanship, agreement, kind of coming together and finding those ways to really mend the bridges and bring people together, as opposed to strongly holding on to those opinions and driving people apart.
Yeah. And I assume that some of the other segmentation work that you've done, how hopeful consumers are, how stressed out they are, all of that goes totally and completely across all political lines.
Correct.
And you've got every one of those groups in every one of those political segments that you just described.
Yes. So in our American Values report this year, we segmented consumers aside from their political association and affiliation. We also segmented them based on attitudinal statements, looking at hope and optimism. And I believe it was not quite the largest, but our group that was politically opinionated and pessimistic, that group is primarily made up of our conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats. So our most staunch political consumers who are very engaged, have very strong beliefs, very much keeping up with the election and the topic. And we see that going into the election, these consumers are the ones who are feeling a bit more pessimistic. And I think that ties back to how staunchly they're holding on to their political opinions and values. So they're really feeling that the election is going to continue to stir up controversy, and they're likely to fall in that group of someone's not going to be happy after the election, obviously. But yes, that segment in particular definitely spans both our conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats.
So for those consumers who are pessimistic, but then also for those who are stressed or hopeful, BJ, what can brands do to either ease the stress or capitalize on the hopefulness that some consumers have?
Well, I think that the one thing that jumps to mind is there's a message if they do want to, if they do want to engage with the election season. The one message that really does seem to resonate is again, to go back to get out to vote, but there's some underlying messages to that too. It's like, it's a very American thing to do, participate in democracy. This motivating people to get out and vote is, assuming it's not coming from, one direction or another for a larger brand, it's pretty safe space, and it's a great, it can be viewed positively. Like, I don't think anybody is looking down on a brand who is asking people to participate in democracy, unless, there's maybe half of the people would be upset if they were telling them who to vote for, but we don't see brands doing that too often. One of these things that I think came up that was a bit of a risky move, and it was just very recent. It was McDonald's. Former President Trump had a situation where he wanted to go into a McDonald's and work at a McDonald's for a day or for a short time. And, this obviously had to be approved by the franchise owner, and then corporate had to approve it as well. And ultimately, McDonald's chose to approve it, which, you could think that this would be a really risky move. Like, okay, we're allowing a very polarizing presidential candidate in. It's going to be in full McDonald's uniforms, filmed in a McDonald's. It is undeniably linked to McDonald's. And I thought that they had a really great response to that after it happened, because, of course, you're going to get people who are very upset about it. And, of course, there's, you're going to get a cry for a boycott and all of this. But McDonald's had a very great response. And they said, like we open our doors to everyone. Where we do not endorse a particular candidate, and we will not endorse a particular candidate, but we're open for everyone. And this is McDonald's has handled this this political brand hijacking, that has happened to them. This is the second time now that it's kind of happened. I mean, the first time it happened without their consent. I think it was when Kamala Harris said that brought up the fact that she had worked there when she was younger, and then they were forced to to try and verify records, and they were put into the spotlight again. So this is a very difficult position, but I thought they handled it very well again, and stating that 1 in 8 people have worked at a McDonald's in their lifetime. And this is a lot of people who share a common experience of actually working at a McDonald's. And it's not something to be ashamed of. It's something that a lot of people have done, and a lot of people can kind of get together and relate to. Again, without confirming, denying, going into any sort of, getting into the fray. I thought they stayed above it, and they kept on message and did a great job of, getting it out there and making the best of it.
It sounds like they did a really good job of threading that needle. That is a hard line to walk. And I think the thing about all of that stands out to me so much is that, the statement about McDonald's is for everyone. So how they were able to take what could be a very fraught situation that could be very polarizing and bring it back to their brand values.
Right.
That's brilliant. And that feels like there's an important lesson there that every company can learn about how to deal with these somewhat tricky situations.
Absolutely.
If consumers are stressed, which Lisa, all of your data shows, and if they're even if it's just the perception that media outlets are amplifying that stress and making consumers feel even more stressed about everything. A 24-hour news cycle does that organically anyway. Is there anything that brands can do to help lessen the stress that consumers are feeling?
I was going to say one of the brands that I included in some of my reports was Stonyfield Dairy, and it's not directly to media outlets, but a response to how toxic social media can get. And so they have put out this campaign encouraging their consumers to have what they're calling a toxic-free election. And so the weeks leading up to the election, they're encouraging their consumers to really sign up for this challenge, to back away from and not be going on social media as much, because you're seeing so much misinformation, but then also just the high tensions and the arguments that can come out on social media. And so for every consumer who signs up for this, there's then a donation happening to some sort of sustainability cause that ties back into the brand overall. But I thought that was a really interesting take to really just tell consumers, like, let's do what's good for all of us, and just maybe, pause, push the brake a little bit, and avoid these echo chambers and scenes that can become so tense and full of animosity on social media.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that would play well with a brand who's, kind of famously offline in a way, like outdoor brands, somebody like like an REI or maybe even Nike or somebody like that, who can just kind of say like unplug and get out and run, or do something else. That's a good example. I don't have any offhand that I've seen in action, but as far as like ideas, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. I haven't seen brands do this either, but what keeps occurring to me is things like you see this unrelated to the election, with brands talking about, when you're stressed, give yourself a little treat. And here's our brand, which gives you that little moment of calm, that little moment of pleasure. And it feels like that's another way as well. And maybe it's not about brands overtly tying that feeling to the election, but rather talking about that just a little bit more. So here's that calming sleepy time tea, or life is hard, eat dessert first. Things like that, just to give people that sense of, here's something that's going to make me feel happy and let me disconnect from everything for just a little while.
Yeah, definitely. Domino's has been on my mind a lot. I haven't seen them do anything specifically this election cycle, but I know in the past they've done such great campaigns of, kind of treat yourself, and free night, free pizza tonight, extra pizza. And I could see that being a very cohesive tie-in to the election, even if they're not calling out directly that it's the election, but in the next 2 weeks kind of saying like, yeah, you deserve to not cook tonight, we've got enough going on.
Exactly.
Leave this one to Domino's, or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. On that end, there could be some opportunities for brands, especially like food brands around the holidays. Families coming together, and it's always a time of tension around an election cycle, and kind of like looking past the things that may not matter, focusing on the family and the good times, and avoiding stepping on a rake at a holiday dinner. But yeah, I think that's a very relatable thing for a lot of people heading into the holidays.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, I think there is so much opportunity for brands post-election as well. And I think that's where so much of the stress comes from for consumers, is anticipating greater political division and tension post-election, which, makes sense seeing how our last election kind of played out in the aftermath. And I think there's an opportunity for brands to really try and, again, kind of bridge that gap, bring people together, use the holidays as a time to, remind all of us of the humanity in one another, regardless of our political differences. And I'd mentioned we just recently got data back, and we're seeing that 70% of consumers agree that after the election, they're hoping U.S. brands will help unify and bring Americans together. So I think that right there just shows people are ready. Well, people are going to staunchly hold on to their political beliefs. There's also a sense we're ready to kind of move on and take the opportunity to come back together and focus on what unites us as opposed to divides us.
Mm-hmm. And BJ, to your point, I think the timing is absolutely perfect then for brands to do that, with the election in early November, Thanksgiving in late November, Christmas in late December, obviously, because that becomes that holiday family gathering together season. So it does feel like there's so much opportunity for brands to find ways to talk about that and talk about how, Lisa, to your point, that focusing on what commonalities we have as opposed to what differences we have.
Yeah, and there may not be time for them to get a full production, video ad in place, but certainly paid social and earned social is a good place to start with that stuff. It's a relatively quick turn, and you can get some good impressions out of it.
Yeah. Is there anything else that for either of you that you think our listeners need to know about consumer sentiment regarding the election, about what brands can do regarding the election, and regarding how consumers are feeling?
I would say that the election stress, the pent-up anxiety, we are seeing it's directly impacting consumer spending. I was just reading this morning that I think it's the Federal Reserve showed that spending is definitely down this election season, and they're correlating that to the anticipation for the election, the sense of the unknown. And so I think for brands, it really does provide further motivation to not just ignore that the election is happening. Obviously, every brand is going to have its best strategy and how to take that on, but I think there's such an opportunity, as we've been talking about, to lean into this unifying sense of spirit and kind of moving past what divides us. And I think that in turn is going to benefit brands the most and make consumers feel more confident and more willing to kind of return to regular spending, holiday spending. I think it all goes full circle. So I think there's great opportunity for brands to take advantage of.
Yeah, and that's one thing, Lisa, I would say is it is my assumption that the people who are kind of holding off on making these big purchases, and they're like, oh, we don't know what's going to happen, with the election, is kind of like the quote. I think you'll hear people say it's often older people or people who are on a fixed income, are more sensitive to these changes. But is it your opinion that I think that they, after the election, kind of regardless who wins, assuming things, and the things are relatively stable, in civil, that their spending would continue to would pick back, business as usual, like shortly after the election, regardless of who wins?
Yes, but like you said, given the general air and sentiment of the country at the time, again, kind of thinking back to early 2021, I think we did see a lot of that unrest impacting overall consumer sentiment. And again, that kind of goes back to my point. I think brands can be a part of trying to level set and put us in an atmosphere that's a bit more calm and comfortable for consumers.
Yeah. There's one thing I would say, as a follow up on this is, there's some things that are not necessarily about the election, but they are very much tied to politics now and the election, which would be like DEI initiatives and things like that, that are very in focus and spotlighted right now. And the one thing I would say, for brands, we definitely, there's some brands have kind of pulled back a little bit from paid marketing on these particular topics. But to those brands specifically, I think it's good to continue, obviously, to continue those programs, but to celebrate them internally, very much, intensely. Make it your focus about your company culture and building a strong culture, especially if you have a large company of tens of thousands of people. You build up that strong culture, and it spreads. It's like your family members. Think about like the, people. When I was growing up, if one of your family members worked at Ford or GM, everybody in the family had a Ford or GM. I mean, sure, certainly there was discounts in there, but there was a sense of pride that somebody worked there. And I think that focusing on your company culture and with those internal initiatives and keeping folks, feeling like they're celebrated and engaged and valued, I think that can go a long way to creating a halo effect around your brand. You're creating, these positive emotions around with your employees.
Definitely live the values you want to represent. I completely agree. I think if the motivation behind those initiatives was solely to talk about them and get the press, then they were being done for the wrong reason. It should definitely start internally and as authentically as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you want to toot your own horn, get out there on social and get that to your most engaged followers and just kind of celebrate your wins in that way. I think that's a safe and appropriate way to kind of proceed in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think digging even further into those DEI initiatives and what brands are doing and what they should be doing is something that would be really great to explore in more depth. But I think for today, we've talked about a lot of different things related to consumer sentiment and the upcoming election and what brands have to think. A few things that really stand out to me, and that is that one of the major opportunities for brands is to focus on bringing people together and how that can potentially link to the holidays as well. Because Lisa, as you had said, consumers are stressed and pessimistic. Some are hopeful, but it's a very challenging time for everyone. So brands can do that. Also focus on urging people to participate and helping them find those happy moments through their products or through activities that align with their products. So to everyone listening in, I'd like to say thank you very much. But as you know, the conversation doesn't end here. If you go to Mintel's LinkedIn and Instagram, we'd love to hear what you have to think about this episode and about any of the others that we do. So if you want to know more about Mintel, visit Mintel.com and sign up to become a member of the free Mintel Spotlight community. Also, make sure you don't miss a single episode of Mintel Little Conversation because you can subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. So thank you and goodbye for now. We'll catch you next time for a new episode of Little Conversation.